The top stories live from the Sky News City studio. The UK economy flatlines in February, but is now bigger than it was going into the pandemic. Tesco profits hit as the supermarket battles rising costs and what it describes as an incredibly tough year for customers. The UK's largest ever battery looks set to be built after manufacturer Invinity receives an £11 million government grant. Ford gets regulatory approval to bring hands-free driving technology to European roads. And
aren't you a little short for a stormtrooper?
I'm Luke Skywalker. I'm here to rescue you.
And we'll speak to Disney's newest Luke Skywalker about the dangers AI could pose to the acting profession. Good morning, this is Ian King Live, an hour of business and economic news from the heart of the city. The UK economy flatlined during February, according to figures published this morning. The Office for National Statistics said gross domestic product was unchanged during the month, slightly below the 0.1% growth that the market had been expecting. However, an upward revision to the January GDP figure from 0.3% to 0.4% means that the UK economy is now bigger than it was going into the pandemic. The ONS said UK GDP is now 0.3% larger than it was in February 2020. Well, joining me now is our business correspondent, Gurpreet Narwan. Now, these figures really, Gurpreet, a bit of a curate's egg.
Yeah, that's right. We know that the economy managed to avoid recession towards the end of last year. It defied expectations again in January by posting 0.4% growth. But I'm afraid that doesn't change the overall picture, which is one of economic stagnation. And figures out by the Office for National Statistics today show that the economy flatlined with growth of 0% in February. And that was largely due to industrial action. We know that teachers, civil servants and healthcare workers all went on strike in February, and this weighed heavily on public sector output. But some of that should drop out of the data soon enough, hopefully as deals are struck. But if we look past that, the economy is still pretty anemic and the full effect of rising interest rates has not yet been felt. The outlook for the year ahead is pretty bleak. The International Monetary Fund earlier this week said that the economy would shrink by 0.3% this year, making Britain the worst performer of the world's largest economies. So if you combine weak growth with high inflation, I'm afraid that doesn't bode well for our living standards. Economists believe that disposable incomes in the UK are set for their biggest drop in 50 years. So I'm afraid there's not a huge amount of good news.
Just a bit of breaking news to bring you that we've just received. A body has been found washed up on a beach following a search operation off Brighton Palace Pier during the heavy winds of Storm Noah. That is from Sussex Police. We'll bring you more on that news story as soon as we get it. Let me tell you about some of the other business news stories around this morning, though. And Tesco warned today that its profits will be flat this year as it seeks to insulate its customers from the impact of inflation. The UK's leader in grocery retailer reported an adjusted operating profit of £2.6 billion for the year to the 25th of February. That was down 6.9% on the same period 12 months earlier, which the company said reflected lower sales volumes in the UK and the Republic of Ireland and the impact of price cuts. Well, Ken Murphy, Tesco's chief executive, said that the company had faced unprecedented levels of inflation in the prices it pays its suppliers for their products, as well as in the cost of running its own operations. He said the company was, however, expecting inflation to moderate during the second half of this year. Well, Tesco's headline pre-tax profits halved to £1 billion, and that was mainly due to impairment charges on its property estate. The shares are currently some 2% ahead. The cybersecurity company Darktrace warned this morning that continuing uncertainty in the macroeconomic environment continues to have an impact on its ability to win new customers. Darktrace, whose customers include Allianz, Airbus and the Royal Mint, said that requirements to hold or cut spending was making potential customers more reluctant to run product trials. But the company said it was excited about opportunities created by a recent upgrade to its email service, which is able to detect novel email attacks 13 days earlier on average than other email security tools. The shares are up some 1.5% right now. And the household goods group behind Imperial Leather Soap, Carex Hand Gel and Original Source Shower Gel said this morning it is on course to hit its full-year profit targets after sales during the most recent quarter grew by 6.2%. PZ Cussons said that the sales growth during the 3 months to the 4th of March was achieved by a combination of price increases and by customers switching to more expensive lines. It also highlighted new product launches, which included an extension of Morning Fresh, Australia's leading dishwashing liquid, into other areas. Now, Ford this morning became the first traditional car manufacturer to introduce so-called hands-off, eyes-on advanced driver assistance technology in Europe. Ford Blue Cruise, the car maker's advanced driver assistance system, has already been launched in the United States and Canada, but has now been approved for use in the UK by the Department for Transport. It can be used on some 3,700 kilometres of roads here that have been designed as appropriate for such technology, but it will initially only be available to owners of the company's all-electric Mustang Mach-E SUV model. Well, the launch comes just 6 months after Ford and Volkswagen closed Argo AI, an autonomous vehicle startup. Well, joining me now is the managing director of Ford UK and Ireland, Lisa Brankin. Lisa, good morning to you. So what can this technology do and what can't it do?
Okay, good morning, Ian. So as you said, it's hands-free driver assistance technology. And so what that means in plain English is when you're in the vehicle, you can set the speed you want to travel at, you can set the distance that you want to travel at from the car in front, you can take your hands off the wheel and your hands off the pedals. And as long as you're paying attention and watching the road, the car will drive for you. So it's a much more relaxing, much more pleasurable motorway drive.
And what have you had to do to convince the Department for Transport to allow its use in the UK?
So we've had a period of time where we've worked with the Department for Transport, where we've shared our data with them. They've come and seen how we've tested the vehicle, and they've also tested the vehicle. So we've had a really collaborative approach. They've actually been incredibly supportive of helping us get here. And they're really confident that we meet all the safety requirements, and they've given us the exception to be able to go live with this product today.
Now, drivers will only be allowed to take their hands off the steering wheel when they're in a so-called blue zone. How will they know that they're in one? Lisa, can you hear me?
Sorry, Ian, I've just lost you a little bit. So would you mind repeating that question for me?
Yeah, sure. I was just saying now drivers are only going to be allowed to take their hands off the steering wheel when they're in a so-called blue zone. How will they know that they're in one?
So they don't need to know, the car knows. So you can pre-condition the vehicle to say that you want to drive hands-free. And when you enter a blue zone, the display on the car will prompt you and tell you that it's safe to take your hands off the wheel. And then when you exit the blue zone, so for example, if you pull off the motorway, again, the vehicle will prompt you to say that you need to put your hands back on the wheel and take full control.
Right. Now, it is quite a soft launch, as I said in the introduction. It's only going to be in the Mustang Mach-E initially. How many of those particular models do you expect to sell this year?
So we'll probably sell around about 5,000 of those this year. And obviously, we're looking at, as we move forward, to maybe roll the technology out onto other vehicles. But at the minute, as you said, it's only on our Mustang Mach-E, our electric vehicle.
So when would you expect this kind of technology to become standard in Ford vehicles in the UK?
That's a really good question, and one that I just can't answer for you at the minute. I guess we'll see how uptake comes. We're planning actually to launch it as a subscription service, because we recognise that this might be something that customers want to flexibly use. So you may decide that you're not going to be driving on motorways and you don't want to have your monthly subscription, so you can stop that. Or you may decide that you're going to be driving a lot on motorway driving, and then you can opt into the subscription. And so we decided to go down a route of subscription-based offering for the product rather than standardising across the range.
Now, this technology, as I said in the introduction, it's been in use in the US and Canada for quite a while now. What's Ford learned from its rollout in those countries?
So that's right. We've got almost 200,000 vehicles on the road in Canada and North America, and they've done over 16 million miles. So the first thing I'd say to you, it's been no accidents, so it's been really safe. We've seen that about half those miles are being driven using Blue Cruise technology. It's been really, really well received by customers. And actually, the the response has been really positive, which has really encouraged us to then move into Europe and launch it, starting in Great Britain.
And Lisa, put this into context for me, if you would, please, of Ford's overall driverless technology strategy right now, because as I mentioned, you and VW closed Argo AI only about 6 months ago.
So we have decided to focus our technology very much around driver assistance and around, if you like, a retail customer experience rather than looking at a business experience. So we've stepped away from those fully autonomous vehicles driving around, maybe delivering pizzas or whatever, where we're looking at technology that's focused around more of a customer or an individual driving experience. So this technology sits very firmly in driver assistance. So the driver is in control or responsible for the vehicle, and this is just helping them do that. So we would say this is level 2 autonomy. The next stage for us is around level 3, which is again is a bit more about the vehicle taking control, but we're not progressing as aggressively fully autonomous vehicles as we have been before.
And why is that?
I just think we see just more benefit for customers. If you think about what Ford's been about, it's about kind of bringing technology to the masses. If you think about Henry Ford in the 1920s and his mass production lines, if you think about Quickly, if you think about ABS, and we just see that this implementation of the technology is much more valuable to our customers, and that's where we're going to focus our efforts in the UK and North America.
All right, Lisa, got to leave it there. Appreciate you joining me today.
Thank you. Thanks, Ian.
And before you all write in and email me, the strap in the top corner there said Dunton in Bedfordshire. And of course, as everyone knows, Dunton is actually in Essex. Although I think Lisa was speaking to us from Bedfordshire, but not sure where precisely. Now, what is expected to be the UK's largest battery has come a step closer with the awarding of an £11 million grant by the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero to the Scottish energy storage manufacturer Invinity Energy Systems. The company says the 30 megawatt-hour battery will help to balance the UK electricity grid, support the renewable energy transition and provide a boost to UK energy security. It claims the battery will store enough energy, including low-cost renewables, to meet the daily electricity needs of more than 3,500 UK homes. Well, joining me now is the Chief Development Officer at Invinity, Jonathan Maron. Jonathan, welcome to you. This is a vanadium flow battery. You better explain to the uninitiated what that is.
Thank you, Ian. Of course. What I won't do is go into the technology in too much detail, but suffice to say, unlike a conventional battery such as lithium ion, we store the power and energy separately in the battery. So the energy is stored separately in a liquid form. It's in tanks. And then you flow that liquid across a cell stack, which is the core IP, which is where the power is generated. But actually, maybe easier to focus on the benefits of this technology. So it is ideal for connecting to renewable energy. It works best when it's being cycled frequently. So therefore, sort of with wind and solar, as that sort of cycles on and off, it doesn't wear out with use. It's got a 25-year life. It's safe. It doesn't catch fire at all. It's reliable, economic to run. And at the end of its useful life, at least 25-year life, it's completely recyclable. So we sort of tend to term it the Swiss Army knife of batteries in that it can offer a very wide range of services.
In what way does it differ, though, from other storage technologies such as lithium-ion batteries?
So it sits very complementary alongside lithium-ion. Lithium-ion is typically a solution for the sort of 1 to 2 to 3 hour range. As we all know, with our phones, lithium batteries do degrade potentially quite quickly over time and with high cycling. A flow battery works best when it is being cycled and lasts for a much longer period in terms of length of the asset, so 25 years, but also for longer duration. So if you need to extend the time scale for the battery, you just add more liquid. So we will run sort of for typically a 4 to 10 hour range, whereas lithium will sit in front of that in the sort of 1 to 2 hour range. But we're also capable of offering a full range of services to the grid. So there'd be that high frequency response, load shifting, or a number of other services which are the battery's capable of doing.
And how much vanadium is in the composition of the battery?
So the vanadium sits in a vanadium electrolyte solution. Again, I won't go into sort of detail here as to how much sits in there, but that's basically a sulfuric acid and vanadium mix. Vanadium itself is the 20th most common element on the Earth's crust. Typically, it's a byproduct from a mining process or a catalyst sort of catalyst recycling process. So typically, it's a byproduct rather than being primary mined.
You've kind of preempted my next question, which is going to be, I mean, I think vanadium is very commonly used in construction and the steel sector in particular. You're not going to be facing competition for resources.
We don't believe so. We work very closely with vanadium producers. There's an organisation called Vanatec, which is the trade association for vanadium. We regularly attend their conferences, and there are a lot of sort of providers in that area that are looking to ramp up production. So we believe there is a plentiful supply available, and actually they're looking at us to prove the demonstration of the technology, and therefore to ramp up the production. That's what's exciting about this award from the UK government, is it enables us to prove at scale what is a very significant asset, and therefore they will be able to ramp up their production to be able to fulfil our needs.
And the battery is going to be manufactured at your Bathgate facility in West Lothian. What is going to be the cost of building it, and how long will it take?
I'm not going to go into necessarily costs here. It's an £11 million grant from the UK government that's match funded by our partners. So that's a sort of project north of £20 million. It will be we're looking to have that installed in 2024 and commissioned in 2024, such that it's readily it's finished by the timescale, the end sort of mid 2025, when the project technically has to be completed by. But we're confident it will be installed by then. And for us, that will then lead us to the next stage in our evolution. It's a real game changer for us. It's a battery that's 6 times larger than the one we have installed at the moment, which is the Energy Super Hub Oxford. And for us, that sort of is a real step forward, improving to our customers, but also to the grid, that this can really be a solution on the route to net zero and dealing with energy security issues in the UK.
Now, as you say, the grant was dependent on you getting matched funding from a business partner. You've said that you've got that match funding. You're not naming your partner, though, as I understand it.
We're not at the moment. We've said we've signed heads of terms with them. We're completing contracting with them, but also that partner is in the process of securing the site. And at the moment, they've asked us not to disclose who they are. So that's where we are. But highly confident that they are there and ready to go in the timescales needed.
Very good. Well, it's a fascinating topic. Hope to hear more from you in the future on this, Jonathan. Thanks for joining me today.
Very kind. Thank you.
Well, still to come here on Ian King Live. Have a look at how global markets are doing this Thursday morning. Stay tuned.
Cost of living crisis has exacerbated the number of fake ads for holiday cottages and places to stay on social media. And now, with the passport delays, there's an awful lot of ads advertising appointments for fast-track delays, for fast-track services, and promising you a passport within a really unrealistic timeframe. So, poor unsuspecting holidaymakers are paying and losing their money. I mean, broadly, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. That's the bottom line. In terms of holiday cottages and the like, do your research. These scammers, they exploit people who are panicking, who are in a rush, who are desperate for a holiday. Do your research. Don't jump in. Don't pay cash. Pay with something. Phone the number. Research the website. Make sure it's a credible source, and don't pay cash. With the passport scams, they're actually advertising appointments. So for the fast track and the premium service, you need to book an appointment before you can actually use the service. And, so it's confusing. And, holidaymakers are sitting online for hours on end waiting for these appointments. So, you can forgive them for rushing at what seems like a really good opportunity. Just don't. You've got consumer rights, you've got protection with your credit card. So the payment is traceable, the credit card company can see where the money's gone, and if you've paid in good faith and you've followed the terms and conditions of your credit card, then yes, you've got a much better chance of getting your money back than if you've just paid cash where it's untraceable, nobody knows what you've given, when you've given it and who to. So yeah, definitely pay with a credit card if you can.
Welcome back. Now, while Ramadan is commonly associated with the fast that takes place daily from sunrise to sunset, the vast majority of Muslim households typically spend more on food during the month. That's because of the importance of iftar, the fast-breaking evening meal, an occasion to be enjoyed with family and friends. However, during the cost of living crisis, there are concerns many families will struggle to provide iftar meals this Ramadan. So the Manchester-based charity Human Appeal is joining forces with Hellmann's to provide free iftar for all food parcels for those in need. Well, joining me now is Abid Shah, the UK Programmes Manager at Human Appeal. Abid, good to see you this morning. For those people who aren't up on Muslim customs, just explain to me the importance of the iftar.
Yeah, thanks for having me. The iftar meal, as you've rightly mentioned, is the meal that typically Muslims have in the evening to break their fast. As you've mentioned, this Ramadan, we've found through research an increased number of people who are concerned about how they essentially sustain themselves. I mean, it's an issue that you're seeing across the country, but in particular in relation to iftar, there are lots of people who are concerned about the cost of living crisis, concerned about the cost of food items, and we are trying to do a little bit about that.
How much would a British Muslim household typically spend extra on iftar meals?
I mean, typical with festivals, as you know, with the Christmas period or Ramadan, there's a general desire to increase or change the food items that you typically eat. So from our research, we found around 50% of people talking about spending around £91 per week. Just a general increase, 65% of people mentioning that, of course, just this Ramadan in comparison to previous Ramadans and previous years, a rise in costs is something that's concerning them.
So tell me what's in the food parcels. I gather you work with a well-known chef to develop ingredients and recipes.
That's right. So we're working with Hellmann's, as mentioned. So we've partnered with Hellmann's for this campaign, and we're working with Ophelia's Kitchen, a well-known chef, Ophelia Begum. And each food parcel contains a variety of items that a household would typically find. So we have food items like pasta and rice and pot noodles, chickpeas, baked beans, amongst other items, long life milk, lentils. And Ophelia's Kitchen have very kindly provided us with a couple of recipes. So in addition to providing the food parcel itself, the intention here is to try and encourage households to not waste food and to be more conscious about wastage of food, which is also something that we've found households to be concerned about in relation to the cost of living crisis.
Now, households that want to avail themselves of this service have to pick up the parcels at sites. I think you're running at Birmingham, Luton and in Bolton. What sort of take-up have you had so far?
So we've had a kind of a mixed response, I suppose. In Bolton recently, our partners on the ground, Homeless Aid UK, spoke about being inundated with calls, unfortunately. A lot of families, a lot of people reaching out to them, inquiring about the food parcels. In London and in Birmingham, again, we found local families getting in touch with our respective partners there and reaching out to them. So there's definitely a concern there with regards to families reaching out and the fact that they've seen the news articles, they've seen the fact that these food parcels are available and they want to make use of it.
And how much has this initiative cost?
This initiative, well, the initiative hasn't ended yet. It's ongoing, so it's hard to tell how much it'll end up costing. I mean, we are looking at potentially providing over 11,000 food items, individual food items through the parcels. So it's not quite done yet. It'll be hard to give a kind of a exact figure at the moment.
All right, Abid, good to see you this morning and congratulations on a very worthwhile initiative. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Well, the US dollar eased last night following the softer than expected March inflation figures, which have raised expectations that next month's predicted interest rate rise from the US Federal Reserve could be the last in this cycle. As you can see, the pound is ahead by nearly 1/4% right now. Against the greenback, it's more or less unchanged against the euro. The single currency, meanwhile, similarly up 1/4% against the dollar. On the equity markets, last night's sell-off on Wall Street was followed by mixed trade overnight in the Asia-Pacific region. There were gains for Tokyo and for Hong Kong, but declines in Sydney, Shanghai and in Mumbai. Well, in Europe, markets are also pretty mixed this morning. As you can see, only the CAC 40 right now among leading continental European stock indices in positive territory. And I suspect that might be because one of the main talking points this morning is LVMH, which is not only the world's biggest luxury goods group, it's also the largest company in France and on the CAC 40, and its shares are ahead by nearly 5% this morning after stronger than expected results, which were published after the market closed last night. Well, here in London, the FTSE 100 is in positive territory. Very, very just. It's 1.5 points to the good, more or less unchanged there right now. Property and energy stocks weighing on the index to an extent there. There are some gainers to mention, though. The house builders Taylor Wimpey and Barratt are among leading blue chip gainers this morning. That's on the back of some supportive comment from one of the brokers, HSBC, this morning. Taylor Wimpey up 2.25%, Barratt up 2%. All of the house builders are ahead right now. And Tesco, I mentioned them a little earlier on the programme. Its shares are ahead by nearly 2% right now as well, 1.75% in fact right now. As ever at this time of the year on a Thursday, a lot of stocks have gone ex-dividend today. In other words, they're trading for the first time without the rights to the latest payout. The batch this morning includes Lloyds Banking Group and Smurfit Kappa, the paper and packaging giant. If you're shareholders in both of those companies, don't worry, that is just an automatic adjustment to reflect the fact that those have gone ex-div today. Outside the FTSE, Oxford Instruments shares are ahead by some 5.5%. That's after the company raised its profits outlook, while the bathroom accessories maker Norcross, its shares are ahead by some 7% on a trading update. As for the oil price, we can see it on the screen there right now. It took another upward bound last night to hit its highest level since the end of January. It's held on to those gains this morning. A barrel of Brent crude will currently cost you $87.38 a barrel. That is up just under 0.1% right now, higher on the session. Joining me now is the global head of brand at Scope Markets, James Hughes. James, good to see you this morning. Very interesting move in the dollar right now. I mean, people do seem to be pricing in the end of the rate tightening cycle.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think the key focus that we have all had this week has been the Fed and those inflation numbers yesterday, and that's kind of got everyone's talking this morning around if that rate hike is now going to be that's potentially on the table is going to be taken off the table. I think what we saw yesterday was interesting because we saw really two sides to this. Number one, we saw the slightly softer inflation numbers, and yes, that has one side. But the Fed minutes later in the evening yesterday also painted that story of recession. So the minutes hinting that we could see a recession coming later in the year on the back of the banking crisis. And even though that banking crisis has what seems to be as eased on the top level at the moment, there does still seem to be a lot of withdrawals happening within some of these banks. So there is still that story there that's a little bit more nervy than what we'd expect. So that's why we're seeing this move in the US dollar as well, and that continuous talk around the fact that we could now see this potential rate hike coming off the table, and that would potentially then follow the likes of Canada, who have now stopped raising rates as well. It just, when we get to that stage, it's how long they then plateau before we start to see them coming down. Yeah,
it's very interesting. I mean, the FX market clearly is looking at the way that sterling's trading against the dollar right now. I mean, the money markets are kind of assuming it'll be one and done from the Bank of England, but I get the sense in the FX market they think there might be a bit more to come.
Yeah, I think the UK is an interesting one as well, because I think if you look at how the economy is performing there, it's not like inflation in the likes of the US or in other areas where we've seen that substantially down from the highs that we'd seen previously. Inflation is still incredibly high in the UK, but underlying some of the economic data still remains pretty resilient, to be perfectly honest. So I think that the feeling there is, how do you control that? How do you control inflation? Well, the rate hikes at the moment aren't necessarily doing that. You know, the rate hikes continue to leave us in this situation where it's pushing the cost of living up higher and is making everything tougher for everyone. The question then comes is, what do you do with the economy? The GDP numbers this morning, the monthly GDP numbers were pretty much flat, came in at zero. They're only the monthly ones. But there is the school of thought is maybe the way to control inflation is for the economy to get worse, to head into recession, as the Bank of England expects. And that will eventually bring inflation down, and then we'll stop that rate cycle. But for now, we expect one more in May, and the safe money is in the fact that then continues to then plateau towards the end of the year. But it just depends on how stubborn that inflation number remains.
Just go back something you said earlier, James. You mentioned the Bank of Canada obviously kept rates on hold yesterday. Are you seeing much activity in the Canadian dollar just now?
There's not too much, but I think because because they have become that almost that shining light of we're stopping the rate hikes, and now we're looking to be pretty stable in terms of those rates. There does tend to be a focus within there. Of course, there's the oil angle as well from a commodity-based currency, and we see that from flows from our client perspective. We see that movement into those commodity-based currencies because of the movements that we see in the oil price. So we do tend to get quite a lot of interest in those pairs, and when you get that added focus of the Bank of Canada moving ahead and being that moving to that next step, we do tend to get quite a lot of interest in those pairs. And so for the Canadian dollar, it's one that our clients especially take a look at.
All right, James, got to leave it there. Good to see you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian.
Just a bit of breaking news to bring you that we received in the last few minutes. This concerns Silvio Berlusconi, the former Italian Prime Minister. As we've been reporting, he is in hospital right now. And we just had an update from his hospital doctors in Milan. They say that Silvio Berlusconi's health continue to improve, but he remains in intensive care. He's being treated for a type of chronic leukemia. We'll bring you more on that, of course, when we get it. Silvio Berlusconi, 86 years old, I think, right now. Still to come here on Ian King Live. Why the UK government has invested in a firm which is fighting climate change by growing and harvesting seaweed. Don't go away. Welcome back. Now, there's been a lot of attention paid recently to carbon capture and storage technology, but it's not the only way of removing carbon from the atmosphere. Stockport-based Seafields is aiming to remove billions of tonnes of carbon from the Atlantic Ocean by cultivating sargassum seaweed, which has a unique ability to sequester and remove carbon. It's just been awarded a grant worth £250,000 from Innovate UK, the UK's innovation agency. Well, joining me now is the co-founder and chief executive of Seafields, John Auckland. John, welcome to you. How does sargassum sequester carbon?
Hi, Ian. Yeah, so sargassum is quite unique in nature in that it grows so prolifically, and it doesn't need very many nutrients to do it. So it doubles in size every 14 days. And in fact, in lab conditions, we've managed to get it to double in size in as few as 5 days. So if you think solving the climate crisis is about capturing as much carbon in biomass as possible. So if you can get stuff to grow really quickly, plants to grow really quickly, then you're going to, by default, capture more carbon. So that's the idea with sargassum. And what's also great about it is you have huge amounts of space in the South Atlantic to work with. If you think of trying to grow stuff on land, we're running out of space on land to grow stuff, and climate change is only going to make that worse. So if we can take this vast unused area of the South Atlantic Gyre and grow seaweed there, harvest it, bale it, sink it to the bottom of the ocean, it will stay there for geological timescales.
So how do you get it to the bottom of the ocean?
It's quite buoyant. So it's got these small bladders on it. You've got to pop those bladders. So what we do is we bring it up onto the deck of a ship. We run it through a screw press and squeeze all the juice out of it, and the liquid, about 82% of the liquid, comes out that way. We then shred the sargassum to pop all those bladders, bale it using an industrial baling machine that's used in agriculture, and then chuck it over the side of the ship, and it achieves negative buoyancy. It drops to the bottom of the ocean pretty quickly. We're talking about 4,000 plus meters of depth, 5,000, 6,000 meters ideally. And down there, the pressure is so great, and because we've removed all the nutrients in that screw press process, we've also removed any incentive for microbial life to eat the bales. So that's why we're quite confident that the carbon will stay down there for an incredibly long time.
And it's important, as you say, to put it on the seabed, because, I mean, when it floats to the surface, it's pretty unappealing, isn't it? And when it rots on the beach, it releases hydrogen sulfide, I think.
Yeah, so it's in the news quite a lot recently, actually, that this sort of 5,000-mile blob of seaweed that's heading to Florida and the Caribbean, that's actually another runaway effect of climate change, ironically, where wind's blown sargassum out of the Sargasso Sea, and it's proliferated in an area that it shouldn't be, and so then it washes up on the beaches and rots and causes all sorts of problems. So we're actually going to the Caribbean first to tackle some of that problem. We're going to create a farm which we're going to install from as early as December. We're fundraising at the moment for that farm on Crowdcube. And so once we've installed that will catch that sargassum and stop it from overbeaching. And then we can ship that out to the abyssal plain, 4,000 meters, and sink it and stop what is currently an ecological disaster at the same time.
And I mean, you mentioned that you're fundraising right now. What is the business model in terms of turning a profit on this very worthwhile venture?
So we're quite reliant on the carbon markets, which is a vulnerability that we're not particularly happy about. So we want to try and think a bit more creatively about how we can fund it. What we're going to do is we're going to sell parcels of our farm in advance to corporates or even retail investors that want to fund climate action. They can then receive those carbon credits and sell them if they want, or they can, use it as part of their own sort of offsetting strategies. And we're working with a partner firm, a sister company called Just Carbon, to deliver that. But we can also extract some valuable resources out of it as well. So once we run it through the screw press, the liquid we get off is most of those micronutrients come back out. So as we recycle them, and they're actually quite valuable to agriculture, they can be used as an organic fertilizer, for example. So we're looking at different sort of pathways where we can valorize that seaweed. And another route as well is to turn it into these feedstocks for industry. So bio-naphtha, biomethanol, these feedstocks that are used by the plastics industry and ultimately the fuel industry, right? So it's another double benefit that we can abate these otherwise fossil fuel dependent industries.
All right. Very briefly, if you'd be so kind, John, obviously you're operating at a proof of concept stage at the moment. How long do you think it will be before you can prove that this is viable?
Yeah, so there's kind of two stages that proof of concept. The first stage is our pilot farm that we want to install in the Caribbean from December. And that proves that we can generate revenues and we can sink the bales and that they stay down there and we can generate carbon credit revenue. The next stage then is going to the open ocean, the South Atlantic Gyre. That's a huge step, huge undertaking, huge investment needed. And that's going to take us a few years to get there.
All right, John, best of luck with it. Thanks for joining me today. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Time now for a look at this morning's business pages. And the Financial Times leads both its print and digital editions right now with the comments yesterday from Andrew Bailey, in which the Bank of England governor indicated that the UK might need to increase its limit for guaranteed deposits above the current level of £85,000. Mr Bailey said the current UK scheme was unlikely to work as intended for smaller banks such as Silicon Valley Bank, which of course had to be rescued last month. The FT also carries a column from Megan Green, who was confirmed this week as the newest member of the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee. And in her column today, Megan Green says that while the commercial property sector is under pressure right now, it is not facing a 2008-style crisis. So relief for us all, I'm sure. The Times leads its business pages with yesterday's warning from the US Federal Reserve that America would suffer a mild recession this year. The Times also reveals that the former Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng held emergency talks with the head of the International Monetary Fund over the institution's rebuke of his mini-budget last autumn. The Daily Telegraph also leads with comments from Andrew Bailey yesterday, but it's homed in on his warning that the rise of social media means that bank runs are faster and more dangerous than ever before. The Telegraph also carries a report on yesterday's warning from JP Morgan to its investment bankers that they will face punishment for failing to work from the office. And that came as it ordered its senior staff back to their desks 5 days a week. Joining me this morning is the Wall Street Journal's editor for Europe, the Middle East and Africa, Torald Barker. Torald, good to see you this morning. Before we talk about what's in the newspapers, I must talk to you about Evan Gershkovich, your colleague who's in prison in Russia right now. There was a very, very moving event in the Journal's New York newsroom yesterday. I think we can put a picture of it up to show the viewers. Here it comes. Absolutely marvellous. I was very moved by that picture.
Yeah, so as many of you will know, Evan was arrested in Russia 2 weeks ago yesterday. He was detained, illegally detained. The US has now said officially that they consider it an illegal detention. He was just doing his job as a journalist, and obviously this is extremely chilling for journalists around the world and for those still operating in Russia. But this was us marking that 2 weeks. There's been this huge outpouring of support for him from those in the newsroom. He's a very beloved member of the newsroom and a very talented journalist, but also more broadly beyond the newsroom in other media organizations and diplomatic channels and governments around the world. So yes, it was a great moment, and we will continue to push hard to get him home.
Yeah, it's good to hear. I mean, reading the Journal's coverage on this story, I mean, the amazing thing is that he absolutely, obviously loved Russia. I mean, he was obviously of Russian heritage, but he obviously really, really loved the country for its own sake.
Absolutely, and he was there to tell the story of Russia, how it's being affected by the conflict in Ukraine, and covering, a wide range of topics from the economy to the impact on society and other things. So, he was there doing his job. He was doing an excellent job, and this is a really, really sad day for journalists. And we will hopefully get him back doing his job again as soon as we possibly can.
Absolutely. Hashtag I stand with Evan. Let's talk about some stories then, Torald. Obviously, one of the big events this week has been EY pulling the plug on its proposed hiving off of its consulting arm. I mean, you've given it, again, big coverage today in the Journal.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty extraordinary story, this, where, an advisory firm has gone through this process itself and, spent hundreds of millions of dollars on breaking apart the consulting business from the audit business in order to avoid conflicts of interest. And then after all this money and all this time, finding that the US partners didn't actually want to go through with it and agree with it. So it's a pretty embarrassing moment for the company. I think there are concerns about whether they'll lose staff on the back of it, but really just a huge amount of time and effort gone into this for it all to unravel at the last minute.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary situation, isn't it? Now, what about the Fed minutes last night? We were talking about the impact earlier on in the programme this has had on the dollar, but it really feels as though the Fed thinks a recession's on the way.
Yes, look, I think the challenge that the Fed has at the moment is, they've raised rates incredibly aggressively. As one of your previous speakers said, I think, we're probably getting towards the end of the tightening cycle at this point. But, we've had some false storms on inflation before. We've had it tick down and then come up again. Core inflation is still pretty strong. And, we're still, monetary policy operates with a lag. So we're still going to see the effects of those rate hikes come through the system over the coming months. And we've already seen some of the issues it's caused in financial markets and in the banking system with SVB going bust. We saw obviously what happened to Credit Suisse, which is, I think, part of these tremors going through the system as rates have gone up so much. So the Fed's trying to balance a slowing economy with still pretty high inflation. If you look at core inflation in the US, it's still pretty high. And the fact that this operates with a lag. And so you'll see the impacts continue to work their way through the system. And so as they balance all of that, I think a pause is quite likely. But again, markets are trying to work out whether you're going to see a sharp slowdown in growth or whether you're going to see inflation pick up again as it has over the last year or two when there's been these false storms. And so I think people are still trying to work out where this goes, honestly.
Yeah, it's a good point you make on the lag. I mean, it is one hell of a lag right now because it seems from this side of the Atlantic, the US economy is absolutely thriving right now. I mean, another strong set of jobs numbers last week, for example.
Yeah, it is. And I think it is an incredibly resilient economy. It's proved that time and again. But, these interest rate hikes, they do affect people over time. The US system is different from the UK system. So here in the UK, a lot of people will be facing, mortgage hikes. Or the rate of their mortgages will go up when they refinance from a 2-year or 5-year fixed over time. In the US, it's mainly 30-year fixed mortgages. So you don't have that consumer refinancing shock that comes through quickly. But that said, there will be less availability of credit because of these financial shocks in the US. And also, as people in the banking system fight for deposits and have to raise rates, the cost of money is going up through the system. So as people borrow, as companies borrow, those rates will slowly tick up over time as people refinance, and you will see that effect hit people. So it's really hard in such a complex and financialized economy to understand how that's going to hit and when it's going to hit.
All right, Toril, before I let you go, obviously Joe Biden's in Ireland right now. Is that getting a lot of interest from the readers?
Absolutely. No, look, I think, any presidential trip obviously gets a lot of interest. But in this case, going back to his roots, I think, yeah, for sure, this is something that both us in the UK, but also the American readers are interested in.
All right, Toril, good to see you this morning. Thanks for joining me. Still to come here on Ian King Live.
Aren't you a little short for a stormtrooper?
I'm Luke Skywalker. I'm here to rescue you.
The battle begins here on Earth to protect the rights of performers as the entertainment industry embraces AI. Stay tuned.
Cost of living crisis has exacerbated the number of fake ads for holiday cottages and places to stay on social media. And now, with the passport delays, there's an awful lot of ads advertising appointments for fast-track delays, for fast-track services, and promising you a passport within a really unrealistic timeframe. So, poor unsuspecting holidaymakers are paying and losing their money. I mean, broadly, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. That's the bottom line. In terms of holiday cottages and the like, do your research. Don't. These scammers, they exploit people who are panicking, who are in a rush, who are desperate for a holiday. do your research. Don't jump in, don't pay cash, pay with something, phone the number, research the website, make sure it's a credible source, and don't pay cash. With the passport scams, they're actually advertising appointments. So for the fast track and the premium service, you need to book an appointment before you can actually use the service. And, so it's confusing. And, holidaymakers are sitting online for hours on end waiting for these appointments. So, you can forgive them for rushing at what seems like a really good opportunity. Just don't. You've got consumer rights, you've got protection with your credit card. So the payment is traceable, the credit card company can see where the money's gone, and if you've paid in good faith and you've followed the terms and conditions of your credit card, then yes, you've got a much better chance of getting your money back than if you've just paid cash where it's untraceable, nobody knows what you've given, when you've given it and who to. So yeah, definitely pay with a credit card if you can.
Global insight, made local. Invest in your future. Sky News Financial Reports, sponsored by Interactive Investor. Invest in your future. Sky News Financial Reports, sponsored by Interactive Investor.
Welcome back. Well, until now, people in the creative industries, such as actors and singers, have been confident that artificial intelligence won't replace them. But a growing trend for companies to recreate actors' voices with AI and then use them for other projects has become a cause of great concern for performers. Last year, Darth Vader himself, James Earl Jones, sold the rights to his voice to Disney for an undisclosed sum, a deal that has spooked other actors. Well, joining me now, from Darth Vader to Luke Skywalker, I'm joined by the actor and star of last year's Lego Star Wars game, David Menken. David, welcome to you. How accurate is this technology?
It's just getting better and better. AI contributed £3.7 billion to the UK economy last year. It's just going to skyrocket. It keeps learning. And if the UK government does what it says it's going to do, it's going to learn very, very fast, and it's going to put a lot of people out of work.
So how big a threat is this to the acting profession?
Well, the UK wants to become an AI superpower, but experts and the government agree that AI needs regulation. So a white paper with guidelines on responsible use has been published, but there's actually no statutory footing there. As a carrot, the government has been proposing a text and data mining exception to the UK copyright law, essentially allowing AI companies the ability to use all published work in the UK for free. Now, there's been a lot of pushback from my union, Equity, the musicians' unions, etc. And the government agreed to go back to the drawing board, but it seems to be back on the table based on the spring budget.
Are you already seeing examples of voiceover work drying up?
Well, yes, it's going to start affecting people, non-playable characters. So if you are in a big game and you're meeting people as you go around the game, that kind of stuff is going to be populated by AI soon. I think it's already starting to happen to a certain extent. But what's happening to us is that there's actually free software out there that's cloning our voices. So what's happening right now is my colleagues and I are in games where people clone our voices and then go in and they mod the game, and then they get us to say racist, misogynist, horrible things. And it sounds like it's us. So it feels a bit like identity theft.
Absolutely. I mean, have you got any legal comeback on that? Can you copyright your name, your voice?
Well, unfortunately, we can. There's intellectual property, but the government's framework on that is way out of date. The copyright law was written in 1988, I believe, and that covered CDs and stuff like that. So it was about consent to record and consent to copy. But AI is taking it and modifying it and making it into something new. So our issue, of course, is that for these games, we sign our rights to our voices in those games. So it's actually the games companies that need to bring these lawsuits at first, at least anyway.
Right, thanks for clearing that up. I mean, would you accept, though, there is a case for using this technology from time to time? I mean, Val Kilmer, his voice was destroyed by throat cancer. They've now been able to recreate his voice as a younger man, which again enables him to carry on making a living. AI
isn't evil. It's going to help humanity flourish. But what we need is regulation. That's the problem. We need to make sure that that the work that people do is used only for that work. And if it's going to be used for something else, then people need to be asked for permission. I mean, consent is sexy, and they need to also be paid for it. Very briefly, David, we haven't got much time. Is there any country around the world that's getting this right, in your opinion? Well, I mean, China has an AI law, but of course, there's no democratic oversight there. The EU is working on a copyright law, but they've actually gone back to the drawing board because of ChatGPT, sorry. They've seen that it's actually very good for the end user, for people Googling and looking things up on the internet, but they want to make sure that they are dealing with the big companies and the big industry as well. So look to the EU, I'd say. OK, David, got to leave it there. Appreciate you joining me today. Thank you. Thank you. That's it from me. I'm back at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Hope very much to see you then. We've got lots more coming up after this short break. Gillian Joseph's in Dublin and Anna Jones is here in London. Do join them after this short break. Thanks for joining me today. Cheerio.